Welcome everyone. If you're still logging on, we are just waiting a minute or so to get started. My name is Sarah. I'm joining you from the customer success team here at HR Partner. We also have Kara with us this morning, this afternoon, your time, Kara.
Yeah, afternoon. It's about 4 p.m. where I am at the moment. Hi, everyone.
Hi there. So we are going to be talking about time off and leave within HR Partner today. We have a couple of really great pieces of information for you, so thank you for joining us. While we wait for everybody to get logged in, it looks like there's still a few folks who are joining us and getting logged in. Wanted to talk with you a little bit about the logistics and the details for today's webinar. So you can, hopefully everybody can see our screen and can see what I've shared with you on my screen today. We have a poll that we'd like to talk you through. So if you are a user and a client of HR Partner, we wanted to know if you currently use an external payroll system. So there should be a poll that's popping up on the screen. If you want to go ahead and assess and take and answer that question, that would be great for us. It helps us guide us as we go through this webinar and as we answer your questions, to be mindful of who our audience is. While you're taking the poll, a couple of just housekeeping rules. I've mentioned a few things in the chats. You will all be muted during the webinar, but you can use the Q&A feature in Zoom to ask any questions that you maybe have. Kara and I will be discussing time off and leave for the first part of the webinar, and the second part of the webinar we'll be discussing your questions. So any Q&A, any questions that you have, we will cover towards the end. We'll try to get to the majority of them. So if you wouldn't mind using the Q&A feature, that would be helpful. And if your question was not answered by the end of the webinar, and it was a public question, meaning you did not mark it as anonymous, we will do our best to track that down and to track you down and to get that the answer for those questions that you have. So please use the Q&A feature. This is different than some of our previous webinars because we're really focusing today's webinar topic on current clients. So clients who are using the system, who have their HR time off and leave modules set up. So that's really what we're trying to focus on today. And let's go ahead and end the poll. It looks like quite a few people participated. And so it looks like the majority of our attendees today are not integrating with an external payroll provider. So the majority of them are probably using, the majority of us today are using time off and leave as a part of HR Partner independently. So you're using the full features of the software. So that's going to be very helpful. And I think that you'll find a lot of value over what we are discussing today. So that is great. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. I'll do a few introductions. Again, my name is Sarah Brandenburg, and I'm here today with Kara. We're both members of the HR Partner Customer Success team. So happy to be able to work with you today and to teach you a little bit about time off and leave. As we know, January 1st is coming up just right around the corner. And so with the new calendar year, we wanted to give you a few guidance pieces, a few tips and tricks, and helping you set up your leave policy so it will be most beneficial for you and will properly work through the next year. So let's go ahead and get started and talk about today's agenda.
Okay, so hi everyone, I'm Kara, as Sarah has already said. I wanted to just run you through some of the things we're going to be talking about today. So we're going to touch on time off and leave figures. We'll then log in and share one of our screens to show you how to set up your time off and leave policies. And in doing that, we're going to talk through resetting your balance, auto accruals, and then we'll address a few other key areas that might impact your time off and leave as well. If there is anything that we don't touch upon today, please do remember we've always got our knowledge base that you can access from your account as well.
So before we begin and get into the big details of today's webinar, today's discussion is going to focus on HR Partner's time off and leave feature only. So if you have questions about other areas of HR Partner, please contact our support line or review the knowledge base. We won't be talking about things like checklists or onboarding. So really dedicating some time to time off and leave for today's conversation.
So as we've already alluded, this is all completely about policies that are built within HR Partner. So we just want to say, for those of you who have logged on today, who do have your leave policies managed through an external payroll provider such as Xero or KeyPay, the webinar may not be too helpful to you. And this is because your policies are run according to their rules, and you would need to manage your accruals in those external systems. Just a quick note though, for those of you who do work in that way, we have recently found out that Xero have changed the way that they're calculating future leave, and it is impacting the view that you have within HR Partner. So we are working on a fix for that at the moment to make it less confusing for you, and we will let you know, we'll update you as soon as we have developed that for you.
So first, let's get started by talking through the allowance versus the balance. I'm going to do a little bit of defining for you. So the allowance in HR Partner is the annual leave amounts that's designated to each employee based on the policy itself. So the allowance is based on the rules that you've created for the policy. It is a yearly entitlement number. So if you head over to time off and leave allowances, that is the figure that we're talking about. If you open up your leave policy and there is a box called default allowance, and that's listed in days and hours, that is what the allowance is, the annual leave entitlement. The annual refresh does use the allowance figure to renew and refresh the balance figure. And this is something that we'll cover later in the webinar and teach you about resetting your balance there.
Okay, so where the allowance is the number stipulated in the policy, the balance is the actual amount of leave that the employee has at this moment in time. So if you ever need to alter the amount of leave somebody has, so potentially a starter who starts partway through the year, who in a full year may have the same entitlement as somebody else, but their leave may need to be prorated because they started partway through the year, it's the balance number that you would need to edit.
And let's talk a little bit about the leave balance table. So this that you see here, this screenshot on our screen is the standard leave balance table. So you see the allowance and you see the balance, you see how they're different. And how we talked about what those are. And then there's available, which is the balance minus any planned numbers. So the available to take numbers is the balance and the planned, and a calculation that's automatically drawing from those two numbers.
Some customers have mentioned that they find this view a little bit confusing, or it doesn't quite fit their needs. So within your leave settings, you can actually change the configuration of that table. So you can decide to hide, for example, the allowance so that you only see the balance, or you can actually add a column that tells you what has been taken already. So that was just something we wanted to bring to light. That is changeable, and you can reconfigure that in your own account.
And let's talk a little bit about allowances. So when you are editing the annual allowance, you can individually edit that on an employee by employee person, a person by person basis, employee by employee basis. So instead of changing the entire policy allowance under the leave policy settings, you can go to their individual leave balances and edit the allowance, or you can choose to honor that policy. One thing that I would want you to know is that if you edit the allowance individually per employee, so this could be because the employee has a longer length of service and they've been given more leave permanently, say 20 days instead of 15, 25 days instead of 20, they have a higher allowance. The system will honor and recognize and prioritize that manually edited allowance over the policy figure. So if Jane Doe in your company has a longer length of service and has a higher allowance, so you manually individually edit Jane's allowance, but the policy is a lower number, the system will honor the manually edited number that you have individually prioritized. So that's good for permanent changes. If it's a temporary change, we recommend that you change the balance figure. So anything temporary, anything short, anything that won't be continually a part of her annual entitlement. So I think now we're going to talk through setting up time off and leave, and Kara's going to share her screen and talk you through that policy.
You need to stop sharing your screen at the moment, Sarah, I'm being told. Which wasn't the case in our dry run, funnily enough. You just bear with us for one moment. I don't know whether you heard me, Sarah, but you need, there we go, we're working.
I didn't hear you.
Perfect. Okay, so you can now see my screen. You can see Aerial Air Charters, our demo account. I'm going to show you how to set up a leave policy in this account. Now, just for those of you who haven't been into your time off and leave configuration in the past week or so, just to let you know, we have changed where that now is. It used to be within setup, but we've changed it to make it consistent with the rest. So you now need to head to the module itself for those configuration settings. So we're going to head to time off and leave, and then we're going to head to configure. Then we are going to select leave policies, and we are going to add a new policy. So the first few options we have on this screen are fairly self-explanatory. So your description is your policy name. We'll call that annual leave. And in the color section, you get to choose the color that you'd like this to appear in your leave table, your leave calendar. Then you get to choose whether you want your balance and allowance to be displayed in either days or hours. The next option is where people start to get thrown. So just to explain to you, the way that this is set currently and by default, do you want the system to automatically accrue leave and track balances for you? No, it means you are creating an unlimited leave type with no allowance. People can continue to request leave against that kind of policy. So generally speaking, we would always recommend that with annual leave, you select yes here. It allows you to tailor it much more and gives you much more control and a better process overall. So we would select yes. You then get a lot more options and a lot more questions that you need to answer. So that first one, again, fairly simple. For the sake of this example, I'm going to give 30 days allowance, and I then get to choose whether I want to restrict employees for requesting more than 30, okay, or more than they have available at that time. And I'm going to say yes, as the majority of our customers would do. So the next question is it's a very important section, and it tells the system how you want this to be accrued, how you want the system to do its calculations. So your first option here asks whether you want your employees to be given those 30 days up front. So that means when they start with you, do they get that bulk, that volume of leave? Okay, we understand it may be prorated, that's fine if they've started at a later start point in the year, partway through the year, but you're still giving them an entitlement at the beginning. Incremental would essentially mean they start with a balance of 0, and the system, for example, if we choose a monthly increment, the sum the system would do is use that allowance of 30 and divide that by the 12 months in a year to give you a balance of 2.5 days per month. And in that case, what the system would do is on the last working day, or sorry, the last day of every month, the system will give everybody 2.5 days added to their balance. Okay, that's how incremental accruals would work. You then have the option, do you want to reset the employee's leave balance each year? Customers who use the incremental method tend not to reset the balance. Customers who use the upfront method often will reset the balance. And what this means is when you come into work on the 1st of January, if that is your refresh date, everybody will get given that allowance and the new balance again. So if they're running out of leave this year, when they come back in the new year, they're given that all again, and the system can start its calculations again. So in this instance, we're going to say yes. We then get more questions. So what date do we want that to happen? Will it happen on their work anniversary? So when they've been here for a calendar year, they get given those days again, or will it happen on a specific date? And I think especially in the UK, that is often the case. This would happen on the 1st of January. The next question, does a portion of your employee's leave balance carry forward when resetting? I'm going to say yes, and I'm going to allow people to carry forward 5 days. So with this example, what will happen here on the 1st of January, somebody who has maybe 3 days of leave left this year would be given an allowance of 30 days and their balance would be 33 because I've said they can carry up to 5 forward. So those 3 days they have left this year would be added onto their balance figure. If somebody had 8 days left in this year, they would have an allowance of 30 and a balance of 35. And that's because we've capped the amount that they can carry forwards at 5. So as you can see, the allowance continues to stay the same, but the balance fluctuates to reflect the settings that you have here. You then get to decide if that balance will expire after a while. So what some companies do is they'll say, yes, you can have 5 days, but it must be used in the 1st quarter. And then you determine whether this leave type has a waiting period. So can people apply for it as soon as they start with your business, or do they have to wait 3 months, 6 months, or even just a matter of weeks? Is there a maximum cap on this leave, on the leave that your employees can accrue? So in terms of the incremental leave types that do not refresh, those companies may want to put a cap in place so that people continue to incrementally accrue their leave every month, but that has to stop once they reach, for example, 40 days or 50 days. For people who do refresh each year and have upfront leave, it comes into play here because you have the option to increase the allowance based on the years worked. And if we say yes, on someone's anniversary, they'll be given 1 extra day of leave. We then go back to this question, is there a maximum cap on this leave that your employees can accrue? And say yes, because while we want them to get 1 extra day for every year of service, we don't want that to be infinite. We don't want them in 20 years' time, when they've been with us for all that time, to have an extra 20 days of leave. So again, we can decide that we want to cap this at maybe 35 or 40 days, not 400. That's quite excessive. Okay, so that's the basics of setting up accruals. Okay, we do have obviously advanced settings and restriction rules as well. We're not going to delve into those today because they take us away from the topic of leave accruals. But if you do want to read more about those, you can do that in our knowledge base. Something that we don't want to bypass though, as you scroll to the bottom of this page, when you're setting up your new policies, you have 2 options that are now set as default turned on when you set up a new policy. And basically what we have done until now is set up auto accruals for the policy, but something else you need to do is turn on auto accruals for your employees as well. You now can do this, as you can see, en masse when you set up the policy. You can also make sure that everybody is given that entitlement as well by default. So you'd hit save, and that is your policy set up. One thing I do want to say is if you want to check whether people have auto accruals set up for your existing policies, you can head to time off and leave, bulk update, and allowances. And that page gives you a list of every policy you have set up in the system. It tells you everybody's individual allowance, and it tells you whether they have accruals turned on or off personally. You can allow editing, and you can flick these sliders to make them more accurate if you do want to turn them on or off on that page. So it's important that they're turned on in the policy and then again here on this page as well. I need to stop sharing now, don't I?
Another thing, just to piggyback off of what Kara has said, in order to turn on the auto accrual individually by employee, you must have a start date set. So you must have that start date set for your staff before it will take effect. So just make sure that each staff member has a start date set and auto accruals will work as intended. Let's move on to bank and public holidays. So HR Partner has a method where you can input bank and public holidays into your system. It is a holidays section under time off and leave under the configure menu. You can input your company's own observed holidays. Inputting holidays in this specific menu by default by default, it counts these holidays as days of leave. So this is a dedicated day of leave for your company, and it will show up on the company calendar. So your staff members will be able to see it on the company calendar as a full day off. They will be recognized as a day of leave when they submit a leave application. You can choose to import default options, or you can manually add your own holidays. And you can do that for years to come. So you can do that up through the year 2023 at present. So very helpful to be able to manage your policies or your holidays here.
Okay, now on to Workday templates. So every employee in the system must have a working day template assigned. You can have as many of these as you need, depending on the types of worker that you have. So you will have a standard working day template. It's important to just check that and check that the template we have got set up does correlate with your standard working days. I think the template we have, Sarah, is it Monday to Friday, 8 hours per day? I think Correct. Is the standard. So if you work slightly fewer hours than that per day, you'll need to just alter that standard workday template because it will automatically be assigned to every employee when they get started. You can create as many as you want. So if you have somebody who works Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, they will need their own workday template, okay? Within a workday template, you determine how you want public holidays to be treated for that employee. So you decide whether public holidays are going to be a normal working day, which means they will need a leave day used to be able to take time off on those days, or whether they're going to be treated as a holiday, in which case they will not be calculated in any duration calculators if they fall within a leave period. Okay.
Moving forward with the duration calendar, the calculator, in the policy settings area, there's an advanced setting that you can create with each individual leave policy, and that is the option to disable the date and duration calculations for the leave type. So if this is a very handy feature, if you have maybe casual employees or employees that don't have a specific schedule, by default, any leave policy will automatically calculate the duration of a leave request. So if an employee makes a leave request, by default, it will calculate it as being 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, depending on the dates that the employee has requested off. Turning this off means that the employee is now responsible for also including the duration. So they must request specific start dates and end dates, and they have to enter in the total number of days that would be. So it does put more responsibility on the employee and the admin user who's approving it, but very helpful for any employee with an irregular schedule.
Okay, so we have 2 housekeeping tools within HR Partner that relate to leave. And so if you make any changes to the things we've just mentioned, so to workday templates or to holidays, for example, within the system, it's really important that we run a housekeeping check. That particular housekeeping check is called recalculate leave return dates. It's really important that that's done. It will go back through every leave request that has already been approved and just double check that that duration is correct, for example. We also have a housekeeping tool that will help if you make changes to any policies or you change a restriction rule on the policy itself. You then need to go to the housekeeping area and do the housekeeping routine for checking leave restriction setup. Okay, these things should not really be done lightly, so they can take up a lot of I don't know whether you say server space. Basically, they're quite demanding on the servers. So they shouldn't be done very regularly at all, only as and when you need them. And if you are feeling a bit reluctant, hesitant about doing them, please do give us a shout, because we can do that on your behalf. Okay.
Wonderful. So now we're going to enter into the Q&A portion of the webinar. We intend to spend just a little bit of time answering some of the questions. We have a few in the Q&A already, but please use this time to use the Q&A feature to submit a question, and we will do our very best to answer you today. If you have a specific scenario or confidential information that's a part of the question, we would encourage you to reach out to our support line instead. Certainly want to be able to keep all of that confidential information as close and as secure as possible. So we'll give you a few minutes to answer and submit any Q&A that you have.
We do have a few in there now, so I think I'll go ahead and make a start on answering, if that's okay.
Perfect.
Yeah. So one question that we have had in is, do we need to create separate leave policies for part-time employees?
Great question.
It is a great question, isn't it? Basically, if everything is the same other than the allowance, and the allowance is only different because of their hours worked, the answer is no. You basically can do exactly what we showed earlier. They can work off the same policy, but you'd go into their employee record and change their allowance to be correct. So you'd need to work out yourself away from the system what their prorated allowance would be, and you change their allowance number and then manually enter their balance as well. Anything to add, Sarah?
No, that's great. I would also, just as a further check, always, this is an opportunity for you as a part-time employee, or if you have part-time staff, to have a separate Workday template and assign them to a separate Workday template. The method that Kira suggested, where you prorata and change their allowance, is a great way to be able to manage part-time employee leave, but creating a separate Workday template adds a separate layer of customization to the system, so that you have a part-time employee also on a part-time Workday template as well.
Both things in unison will be the best practice.
So one of the next questions that came up is that understand that there's some sick leave or sick policy that isn't calculating correctly. Sounds like the policy is a use it or lose it policy, but the accruals are continually adding figures to the policy without implementing that use it or lose it policy. So without having all the information, what it sounds like what's happening in this policy, if you have a leave policy that is adding numbers to the balance over time and is not resetting, is not applying use it or lose it, it sounds like the setting in your leave policy is not set to reset the balance. Again, Kara mentioned this earlier, under your leave policy settings, under the auto accrual settings area, there's an option to reset a balance, and you can reset the balance on a date or on an anniversary day. So a start date, anniversary date for that staff member. So you need to select yes and select a day for the system to reset the balance and thus apply the use it or lose it policy. Otherwise, if the balance is not selected to reset, if that question is answered no to reset the balance, the system will continually just calculate figures on top of another and add up. So that's something to look at in your policy. And of course, if you have more additions or specific situations there, you want to provide us screenshots or a video recording of what's happening, you can do that at support@hrpartner.io. But that should be that question there.
So another question that we have in is, how would we change requested time off from a whole day to hours out? For example, they work in the morning and leave for an afternoon doctor appointment. You can actually, if you enter in one day, or the duration, if they enter in a start day and an end day is the same day, so the system will do an automatic duration calculator of one day. I think there is actually a plus and a minus sign either side, and you can actually reduce it down from one day to fractions of a day. So that would work in that instance. Or clearly you could have your leave policy in hours if you wanted to, but I think having it in days and using those markers beside the duration calculator allows you to take it from one full day to a portion of a day.
Wonderful. The next question is, once bank holidays are entered onto the calendar, is there a way we can book these bank holidays in advance from the staff's allowance in a bulk way? So that's not possible at this time. So what you would need to do is the bank holidays that are entered into a calendar by default do calculate as days of leave. So what I have seen clients do is factor that in when they set their allowance figure. So if there are 10 bank holidays throughout the year, instead of having 30 days of annual leave set as the allowance, you would instead have 20, because they would count those 10 bank holidays as they come up. What happens from an employee's perspective when the employee logs in and submits a leave request and the bank holiday falls within that window of time that they're requesting annual leave. So say they request a week off, but Friday is a bank holiday. That Monday through Thursday, those were the only days that will reduce from their balance. So it will only count as 4 days in the duration calculator and not 5, because one of those days is a bank holiday. But it does not remove on bulk, en masse, your employee's balance at the start of any given year.
Here's an interesting one. So we have, if you do housekeeping based on staff working day templates, if you've changed it mid-year due to a change in contractual hours, how can you set the working day template for a range of dates? Otherwise, housekeeping could change holiday hours booked incorrectly. In cases like that, I think you need to flag it with us and we can speak to the development team and see if we can do something individual for you, because I agree that is quite a tricky and unique situation, I suppose, in that respect. I don't know if something would be possible in that respect, but we'll definitely see what we could do on an individual case-by-case basis, I think, there.
Another question is, our company is in education and I need to list the school holidays, as some colleagues do not work during this time. How is the best way to do this, please? So if you have a school holiday and you want it listed on the company calendar and it's considered a day of leave, again, that would be appropriate to use the bank holidays feature, which is time off and leave, configure holidays. Now, what you need to do then is make sure that the Workday template is properly applied for the educators who would have that listed as a holiday and then would not have that listed as a holiday. So what you need is have different Workday templates, because that is how you adjust whether or not a holiday is counted as a day of leave or not. There's a setting within the Workday templates. If you would like, you can also enter in any significant dates in the company calendar as just significant company dates. That is under time off and leave, configure company calendar. And that is where you can add dates for the company to show up on the calendar. Originally, that was intended for things like orientation, training days, social events, things that the entire staff can see. But you can enter in those holidays, those days off there, but they would not count as days of leave if entered into the company holiday. So we do suggest entering in the bank holiday days and then adjusting your Workday templates so the people who do have those days off, it does apply as leave for those people.
Okay, so something else that's come up is in terms of the accruals. So if you work on a basis of incremental accruals, when does the system do the accruals? So daily accruals are fairly straightforward. They are done at around 12 GMT. Weekly accruals are done at the end of the week on a Friday. Monthly accruals are done on the last day of the month, and quarterly accruals are processed on the last day of the quarter.
Wonderful. And there's a comment here that your vacation starts at the start date, not on January. So I know we've been putting an emphasis on today's webinar on the start date of the leave policy being reset on January 1st. But if you change that reset balance figure from January 1st, you can do it on the anniversary date. The rules still apply. So the information that you learned today still applies to your policy. It would just happen at a different date, not on the 1st of January.
Go on, Sarah, sorry.
No, that's okay. One other question that came through. I want to edit my leave policy and turn off allowances and make the policy an unlimited policy. How do I do this? So earlier in the webinar, Kara shared her screen and she showed you at the very top, there's an option to calculate allowances and track balances. If you do turn that off, it virtually creates an unlimited policy. They can create and they can request as much time off as needed whenever that happens. If you choose to have a policy that you edit mid-year and you make a major edit to, so this is a major edit, you would change it from tracking balances, tracking allowances to not. That's a major change to a policy. And if you're doing that mid-year, our best practice, our suggestion for you is to create a brand new policy and begin tracking and using that policy at a start of a new calendar year, new anniversary year, whenever your tracking begins. If you change the policy mid-year like that, in that specific way, you risk losing some previous historical data along with it because you're changing the entire policy. So if you have major changes to your policy, it is a best practice to instead create a new policy and create it with the new rules in mind so that you can have all of the historical information contained and preserved. So just a suggestion for you there, because that is a major change.
And if you do that, the best practice would be to hide the old policy from view so that employees can no longer see it. It will minimize confusion on their part. You can hide it from the admin view as well if you want, so you have all the data there, but nobody is seeing it and getting mixed up with it.
Absolutely, absolutely.
We have a question come through as well. Can you limit the maximum number of days requested? As we mentioned early on, you can, the way in which you limit it, so you can stop people from requesting more than they have available. There's no way of limiting how much they request at any one time, unfortunately.
So I don't see any other questions that have come through.
We have just had a few more.
Oh, you have a couple more.
Up.
Okay.
Yeah, all of a sudden we've got a handful more have just come through. Are we able to get emailed a copy of the presentation to refer back to? Yes, it's been recorded and it will be sent out afterwards, I think before the end of, although it is already Thursday. Are we doing it before the end of the week? As soon as we can.
I would say the start of next week to be safe by the time
yeah.
we edit the video just further.
Absolutely. Okay.
So one of the questions that came through, and I will answer this, would this apply if we went into lockdown and furlough was introduced? Do you create a new policy? So that's dependent on your own company policy. So yes, you can create a new policy specifically for the pandemic, specifically for an organization, an organizational event or change like the pandemic, but it depends on your own company policy. You have the ability in the system to create a separate new policy for a specific event. But that is a preference that it depends on how you want to handle things and manage your policies within your system. Good question. Interesting question.
Okay, we've just had a question on leave approvals. We introduced enhanced leave approvals earlier in the year, and we've just had a question through. For leave approvals, can we have multiple approvers depending on the employee, or is it just one approver? You actually can. You can have as many approvers as you need per employee. You can have one leave approval process that fits all, or you can have a different leave approval process per employee if you really wanted to. It may overcomplicate things, but it is possible. You can name as many different employees in the system as you want who need to be a leave approver as well. They no longer need to be an admin user. I've taken a note of your name, and I will send you over the help desk articles on that, because it's a bit too complex to explain right now, but yes, it is possible. If anybody else does want information on that, let us know and we can send you over the knowledge base articles. Okay.
Another question is, if our time off is based on years of service, how do we handle the leave policies for employees with different yearly leave amounts? So again, the system allows you to track years of service and increase the policy amounts based on years worked. And it's 1 day or one incremental amount per year worked. And that is the ability of the system. So if you have specific situations where you or a staff member accrues leave a little bit differently, or maybe earns that leave and that time off a little bit differently, you have the ability to manually edit their allowance to mirror exactly what your policy states. But within the system, within the policy, it's limited to be able to allow years of service based on years worked, 1 year per day. So if you accrue things a little bit differently, if they earn additional years of service, additional balance in a different way, your best bet is going to be manually adjusting those allowance figures each year, or manually adjusting the balance on an occasional basis if you need that.
I do think that's everything answered. No.
I think so too. If you have any other questions, if you have any other options, if you want to flag something with our developers, we do our best to take client feedback very seriously and tailor certain aspects based on the needs of the system. So if your question wasn't answered today, if we didn't get to it, we apologize, and please reach out to us at support.hrpartner. We would be happy to help you. And thank you so much for joining us today. We are close to the January 1st deadline, so please take a close look at your leave policies, and we will do our very best to address them, to reach out and to help you there.
Okay.
Wonderful. Anything else?
I don't think so. Nothing from me. Just thanks again for your time.
Excellent. Well, everybody have a wonderful day and afternoon, and keep in touch with us if you need. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.